Have you ever just stopped and thought about one of the most incredible facts of life? That a huge, complex creature, like you, starts from just a single cell? Well, today we're diving deep into that mystery. We're talking about morphogenesis, which is the incredible story of how life, quite literally, builds itself. I mean, really think about that for a second. How does one simple cell know how to become a person? How does it know how to build a heart that beats, a brain that thinks, and hands that can build? It's a process so mind-boggling it can feel like actual magic. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain on a powerful new theory that's starting to explain how it all works. So here's our game plan. First, we'll get a real handle on the problem itself, why this is such a puzzle. Then, we'll look at a classic metaphor that people have used for decades to try and understand it. After that, we'll get into the new stuff, a radical idea about self-building rules, how those rules create this amazing cascade of complexity, and finally, how this one idea ties together how we grow, how we heal, and even how we get sick. All right, let's jump right in. Section 1, Life's Greatest Puzzle. And calling it that is no exaggeration. This is genuinely one of the fundamental questions that keeps biologists scratching their heads. The official scientific term for this magic trick is morphogenesis. It's the process of getting organized parts, like tissues and organs, from what starts as, well, a pretty featureless little clump of cells. We actually know a ton about the individual building blocks, the genes, the proteins. But the real challenge, the big mystery, is figuring out how they all coordinate, how they work together to build something so intricate and stable.
So how have scientists tried to picture this incredible coordination? Well, for a long time, the best tool we had was this really brilliant and intuitive metaphor, the ball in the hill.
This idea is called Waddington's landscape, and it's fantastic. Just picture a developing cell as a little marble sitting at the top of this hilly landscape. As it starts to roll down, it gets funneled into these different valleys that branch out. Each valley represents a different path, a different destiny, becoming a muscle cell or a skin cell or a neuron. And once it's deep inside one of those valleys, it's really hard for it to get out. It's a great way to visualize how development seems so stable and decisive. But there's a huge catch. The metaphor is great, but it leaves this one giant question just hanging in the air. If the cell is the ball and its fate is the valley it rolls into, then what on earth is carving those valleys? What force is actually building and shaping the landscape that guides the whole process? Waddington's picture doesn't tell us. And that brings us to the real core of this explainer. It's a new, powerful answer to that question. A theory that's all about the idea of rules that build themselves. So the first key idea here is something called constraints. Now, don't think of these as just limitations. They're more like the active rules of the road, the structures that guide everything that happens in a cell. A perfect example is an enzyme shape, which only lets one specific reaction happen, or a cell membrane, which acts as a gatekeeper. These things direct all the action, but they aren't used up in the process. They're the stable guardrails of biology. Now this is where it gets really, really cool. What happens when all these different constraints start supporting each other? Well, that's what's called constraint closure. It's when this whole network of rules and structures becomes self-sustaining. So an enzyme helps build a membrane, and that membrane, in turn, holds the enzyme right where it needs to be. It's a loop. The rules create a system that then works tirelessly to maintain those very same rules. And there it is. That's the answer to our big question. What builds Waddington's landscape? It's these incredible, self-sustaining networks of constraints. They aren't static. They are the dynamic architects that are actively carving the valleys and pushing up the hills, guiding that cell on its amazing journey. In other words, the landscape builds itself. Okay, so if the whole system is so good at keeping itself stable, how does it ever change, right? How do we get from one stage of development to the next? Well, that is explained by what's called a cascade of creation. See, development isn't just one smooth ride down a hill. It happens in a series of steps. First, you have a stable system. That's a constraint closure regime. Then, for a short period, that system gets a little wobbly. It destabilizes. This creates a brief developmental window. During this flexible phase, the system can explore new possibilities, form new connections, and then, finally, a new, even more complex set of rules locks into place, creating a whole new stable state. So what this means is that morphogenesis isn't about executing one giant pre-written blueprint. It's more like a cascade of these cycles, one after another. Life builds complexity in stages. You get a stable state, You destabilize it, you explore new options, and then you restabilize at an even higher level of complexity. It's just a beautiful step-by-step process. Now, for our final section, we're going to see how this powerful idea goes way beyond just how an embryo grows. It turns out this single framework might help us understand development, repair, and even disease all at once. This is really the sign of a great scientific theory, when it can connect things that seem completely different. This whole concept of self-stabilizing networks gives us a totally new way to look at how living systems maintain themselves, how they heal, and sometimes how they break down. And what's really fascinating is the direct comparison this lets us make. Think about tissue regeneration, like healing a cut. The body goes through that same four-step cycle, but the goal is to get back to the original healthy network of constraints. Now, cancer, in this new view, is the same fundamental process gone horribly wrong. What happens is a competing rogue network of constraints shows up and basically hijacks the system for its own selfish growth. It's such an elegant idea. It suggests that healing and disease aren't run by two totally different sets of rules. Instead, you can get these vastly different outcomes, one that saves your life and one that threatens it, and they can both spring from the exact same underlying dynamic process. And just to be clear, this isn't just a nice story. This is real, testable science. The theory makes specific predictions about what biologists should find right before a big developmental shift. Things like a sudden spike in the variety of genes being expressed, or cells taking longer to recover after being disturbed. These are concrete signals that scientists can now actively look for in the lab. And this quote from researcher John Cantillo really just nails it. He says, "This framework unifies development, regeneration, and cancer under a single dynamical principle." I mean, that's the ultimate goal, right? To find the simple core logic that connects it all. So we'll end with this thought to chew on. We so often think of biology as being all about the code, right? The genes in our DNA. But this theory suggests that's only half the story. What if the true magic of life, the secret to health, and the tragedy of disease lies not just in the individual parts, but in the stable, self-sustaining networks they learn how to build together?